Oh mein Gott. Leute, ich weiß nicht, wie Glück das war. Die Geschichte hat sich genau gestoppt, fertig war. Genau bald wurde das Wort ab von sich selbst einfach beenden, von dann Verbindung. Oh mein Gott, es hat einen richtigen Moment gestoppt. Ich wollte genau der Chapter 20 anfangen, aber es hat gestoppt in dem richtigen Moment, wo ich wollte gerade anfangen. Ich kann es euch zeigen, was ich meine. Seht ihr, es ist ja bereit. Ich war hier und ich wollte genau Klick drücken, aber es hat genau in der richtigen Moment gestoppt. Oh mein Gott. Aber hoffentlich stürzt sie nicht jetzt ab, für noch diesen Rest zu hören. Ja, Leute, wir schauen mal, ich probiere mal, dass wir noch ein bisschen weiterhören können, dass wir mal dann fertig sind. Okay, dann viel Spaß.
Lockdown, Paw Patrol. Act 3, Dawn of the Dogs. The explosion had seemingly come from nowhere. All Rocky remembered was running toward the shelves, scattering tools and throwing boxes aside like trash as he frantically searched for something to free Chase. Even though the police dog had given his final rites through the door, the mix refused to walk away, desiring to try until the very last moment to save the shepherd. Zuma's body lay on the floor, splayed out as a faint trickle of blood came from his head. The Labrador had been struck hard. Rocky didn't desire to go farther. He just needed the problematic dog to stay down for a few moments. Overcome in panic and anxiety, Marshall tried to say something, but his voice had given out, forcing the Dalmatian to flee for somewhere to hide. Rocky looked toward another shelf, still with a hopeful expression, when the blast happened. The walls smashed inward, a wave of fire violently erupting through it into the room. The explosion toppled the rest of the tower before they had any chance to react, the fires catching them within its surging claws. It was a while before Rocky regained consciousness. Wincing, he tried to lumber himself back up, his paws scratching against the floor. He felt burned, his fur singed as fire screeched over him during the explosion. The door that acted as the barrier to the basement held against the blast for only half a second, before the pressure ripped it off the wall and sent it crashing through the air. Coughing out dust, he tried to see through the smoke that pilfered in the room. Liberty was next to stand, hobbling her elongated body on 4 weak little legs. She tried to speak but only hacked out ash and dust. Blinking her eyes, she turned her head slowly, only to come to a massive hit of shock. She jumped back at the sight of a metal object smashed into the garage door, bending it inward and opening up the outside. It was the door from earlier, ruptured off its hinges and now used to break out of the garage. "Marshall?" Rocky barked, looking around the scorched room. "Are you Dash?" "Yeah, I'm right here." The Dalmatian suddenly appeared at his side, his white fur blackened with soot. "You okay?" To Rocky's complete absolute surprise, Marshall wasn't even a twinge afraid. He was clearly in somewhat distress, as he had just witnessed his home collapse, yet for the current situation, he was oddly calm and collected. "Me?" the mix said, aghast. "What about you? You're covered in ash." "It's soot, actually. There's a difference." The Dalmatian shook himself, producing a black cloud. "These kinds of scenarios are my specialty. I'm a firefighter, remember?" He gave a confident smile. "Wait," Liberty ran up. "Where's Zuma?" All 3 dogs looked to where the lab's body was left. To their alarm, the 4th dog had vanished without a trace. Not even a trail of paw prints could be seen, nor a blood trail. Zuma had seemingly woken up and slipped away. "We need to find him." Marshall looked to the group, and Chase too. He was already walking toward the dark empty doorway. Instantly agreeing with Marshall, Liberty jumped to his support. I agree, we gotta find the lab. Rocky was unsure. Do we, though? He questioned. You saw what he did. The Dalmatian stopped in his tracks, quietly heeding his words. Marshall loved his family unconditionally, and seeing Sky and Rubble fall to the monster nearly shattered him. He lowered his head, whimpering as he looked to the dark corridor. The sadness within the poor dog was infectious, and Rocky lowered his ears as he sat down. Marshall, come on. They needed to get a move on, and as much as Rocky's own heartache from leaving Chase and Zuma behind, the nightmare wasn't over. Look, the garage door has been broken open. He pointed his tail toward it, a small cough puffing out of him. Let's just go. No. Marshall stood firmly. I'm not leaving Chase or Zuma down there. We aren't leaving, just getting out of here. The mix tried to reason, out of the smoke at least. Despite his reluctance, Marshall eventually relented with slight agitation in his eyes. His mood was read rather easily by his grayer brother, and Rocky held out his paw with compassion in his eyes. As the two of them turned to escape the basement, finally emerging outside, Liberty narrowed her eyes. Her work wasn't done yet. Straight face. He thought he was dead. Chase and Ferox Malice shared a room as it sparked into flames, consuming the entire basement and tower in mere seconds. Both the puppy and the creature were within the eye of the storm, their bodies almost incinerated in the blast. And yet, upon painfully opening his eyes to the ruined, charred room, did he realize he was still alive. He woke up screaming in agony, "Hawawawa!" His body was blistered and burned over, patches of his fur and skin peeled away to a pink, soft layer. There was not a word imaginable for the pain he felt, as the first breaths he took seemed to scrape the interior of his lungs. As the scream forced out the air in his body, he began hyperventilating, each and every breath bringing out a smaller scream with it. He was alive. What horrid deity above had denied him the chance to die? How much more would he be forced to suffer? His mind was long broken, and now his body as well. Perhaps he would never have the chance to rest. He shouldn't be alive. The smoke should have infested his lungs and suffocated him. For him to be spared, something had to have broken through the basement, creating a hole to the outside where the smoke could escape. And if such a place had been created, it meant he had a chance to escape outside. Or maybe it was the garage, a sign that it was opened and waiting for him? What? Where? He cried out with a scratchy voice. Where am I? His heart and lungs still erratically pounding away, the sound of settling metal creaking above him. The entire room had caved in, the ceiling bursting open like a boil, spilling in various metals and building foundation to meet a melting doom in the fires. The inferno was gone, however, only leaving behind the festering burns on his body and a room covered in ash and soot. A part of him wanted to lie down and stay there, giving up his life with all the agony it presented. Only in the back of his mind did he know that there was still a chance, an opportunity to reunite with his family. Praying Ferox Malice was buried and incinerated from the blast, Chase flexed his first paw, his front left, trying to feel its articulation. After some painful movement testing, he concluded all his limbs and joints were fine, although cooked medium rare from the fire. Unable to suppress his pain, the dog audibly let out several groans and cries as he pushed himself up. To say it hurt to walk was an understatement, as his entire right paw was peeled pink of its top layer. Okay, he staggered, trying to slow his heart rate. Oh, okay. Loudly emitting a groan, he took a step forward. After taking a moment, he remembered vaguely where he was, the communication room. Gritting his teeth at the pain, he began making his way toward the exit, limping slowly. Walking out into the hallway, stepping over fallen metal and burned drywall, his eyes widened as the damage was revealed. The blast had almost completely incinerated Ferox Malice's nest, the walls of flesh and gore burned into ash and revealing the real basement walls behind. It was refreshing to see the corridors empty of infection finally, and even the eggs were gone with not a trace of them in sight. Perhaps Zuma hadn't failed after all. Walking in the direction of the garage, Chase stopped in the middle of his hallway. His path was blocked, and the top ceiling shattered and collapsed into debris. First believing he was trapped, he lowered his eyes and emitted a pained whine, until he remembered the vents. With Feroxmalis infection gone, the ceiling vents were finally uncovered and unclogged of the biomass. All Chase needed was a vent entrance, and he'd have to backtrack for one. "All right then," he growled, his right leg quivering as it tried to stand, "so be it." Sharply turning on his path, he faced away and walked in the other direction. Scanning his eyes along the bare wall for a vent opening, he turned his nose away at the disgusting smell of fried gore. Even while most of it was gone, it had been cooked into a disgusting stench that flooded the hallway and its corridors. His mind raced for solutions, roadmaps, any answer for where his life could be headed should he escape. Even if Ryder somehow returned within the hour, a good portion of the team was gone and the rest scarred, and the entire tower was destroyed. Where could they go from here? Making a turn as he followed the hallway, he thought over each of his friends and family with remorse. He'd never find an apology suitable enough to redeem what he had done, assuming it was redeemable at all. Marshall used to be innocent, only to have it all shattered in the worst way possible. Surely he'd never be the same again. As much as Chase hated to say it, he was no leader. Such a title could only be applicable to Rocky, the one dog who held them all together the best he could. Ending. He could barely imagine what Skye would think of all this, and he wondered if killing her was more a mercy than putting her through the horrors. With Rubble carrying Feroxmalis from the beginning, if he ever got out of here, Chase would shudder at any bulldog he came across. Emerging into a clearing, the burned shepherd looked around as the old memories of his life danced in his head. Each step of his paw cracked and sizzled above the ash-covered floor, stenches of melted rubber and plaster making him grimace. There was nothing left down here, just an empty tomb of broken hearts. The sooner he found a vent opening, the sooner he would escape this nightmare. Sure enough, limping through the room, he finally found a vent cover loosely fastened. He had found his escape. "Trying to show me up again?" Chase stopped in his tracks, recognizing the voice all too well. Taking a long sigh, he lowered his head a little as he felt a burning gaze on his back. Walking through the ash and debris, Zuma emerged with a cold expression on his face. "You always were hard to get rid of," he admitted with a slight drip of admiration, only for it to be quickly swallowed up with spite. Still, with his back turned, Chase searched for words to say, but he couldn't find anything to say. "What are you?" Zuma squinted his eyes, looking the burned dog up and down. "How did we get here?" he said, looking down at the ruined basement floor. "Everything's gone, turned to ash, and whose fault is that?" Now Chase turned to face him, a sternness in his eyes. "Yours," he said simply. "You're the one who destroyed the lookout." "I did what needed to be done." The lab argued. "Burn down our home, maybe, but look around you. It fried the infection and killed Feroxmalis," he declared with fanatical victory, a grin creeping on his face. "The only thing I have left to get rid of is you, whatever you are." "You," Chase said with a shaky breath. "No, you're not allowed to talk," Zuma suddenly growled, bristling his fur, "because all that's ever come out of your mouth is lies." He swiped his paw in rage, kicking a piece of wood. His voice slowly lowered, speaking calmly, yet the rage was all too clear. "And maybe a lie I could get behind. We've all made our mistakes," he admitted, "but you're a murderer. And killing a member of our family, well, I don't think I could ever get behind that." It was then that Chase understood. You're here to kill me, aren't you?" The lab was unresponsive, yet his eyes flicked to meet Chase's gaze, a quiet standoff between the two of them. "So that's it?" The shepherd chuckled darkly. "Kill your own brother, and that's the end of the Paw Patrol?" "You are not my brother." Zuma suddenly shouted, snapping in anger, matter of fact. I don't really know what you are. You're not the dog I spent 10 years with. He shook his head, you're not Chase. Even in his own anger, Chase couldn't deny how much he agreed with those words. Sighing to himself, his hostility faded away, leaving him as nothing broken shell. Letting himself get back, his burned wounds cracked in protest as he moved, his ears flattened as he could only confirm Zuma's word. You're right, he finally confessed, a faint sniffle emitting from him. I don't even know who I am anymore. Tears ran down his cheeks, hissing as they passed over one of his blisters. He had tried to fight through the sadness, the static, the shame, but now he realized he never could. Nothing. He whimpered, nothing will ever be the same. He looked back at Zuma, now unable to control the emotion leaking from his eyes. I'm sorry, Zuma. The lab faltered slightly, raising an eyebrow. I'm sorry. Chase wept, for ruining all of it. Heeding his words, Zuma averted his eyes to the ground, pondering over his choices in the situation. He had one, although he didn't expect how easily he achieved it. A part of the lab wanted Chase to remain defiant, allowing him to further bask in the satisfaction of exposing a monster hiding within his friend. But Chase wasn't a monster, he was a puppy. A sad puppy who made terrible mistakes and was being eaten up alive inside. Perhaps the old police dog of the past still remained within him, but Zuma wasn't interested in the answer to that question. Something about Chase's accountability only made him angrier. We've done a lot, haven't we? The lab leaned back a little. We've solved problem after problem, saved the town and city more than we can count. He came back forward, remembering a key moment from their time in Adventure City, yet, somehow, it always comes back to you. He said with spite on his tongue, what makes you so much more special than us, Chase? It's always you up in front, speaking for the squad, and dogs like me in the back. For the longest time, Zuma remained the underdog of the team, with few times was he called on missions. It was always Chase, Marshall, or even Rocky who sat on the pedestals. Meanwhile, Zuma and sometimes Rubble were simply left at home. His grudge of being underused wasn't exactly important to their situation, but now that he had a moment alone with what remained of their leader, it was going to be addressed. Even now, facing death, Zuma spat the last word, it's you who tries to control us, direct us like fucking puppets. Well, we did it. He laughed erratically, we followed your word and obeyed every little command you gave us. He darkened, leering at Chase with gritted teeth, are you proud of where your leadership took us? Sky and Rubble dead, Marshall traumatized, and Rocky struggling to keep his own sanity. You know, I knew you wouldn't agree with me on my plan to incinerate the tower, of course you wouldn't. He grinned, wagging his tail slowly, no tower means no Paw Patrol, and once that's gone, there's no one left for you to control. The shepherd froze in horror, backing up slightly, Zuma, that's not true. No, it is. The lab defied, I'm more of a leader than you ever were, and I'll make them see that. He emitted a low growl, whatever it takes to fix what you destroyed. To see his old friend acting on such cold ambition was horrific, breaking Chase's heart further than he ever imagined. He had seen a lot and dealt with terrible things, but this was something else. He couldn't let Zuma hurt his friends. A crying fire surged within him, screaming up to Chase that he couldn't die now. He had to go back, he had to make sure they were all okay. Chase shook his head, blinded by his own emotion and panic. I just wanted to keep you all safe, keep you happy. You want us to be happy? Zuma challenged, we won't be happy until you're gone, and I fix everything. Breathing heavily and ignoring his body pain, Chase slowly stood up. Narrowing his eyes, he curled his lips against the patches of exposed flesh, baring his teeth. I will not let you do that. Snarling, Zuma dropped his morals and embraced his own rage. I figured, The Labrador jumped forward, calling forth his feral instinct into the attack. Lunging at the shepherd, he bared his teeth and went for the neck. Shaking his head from the fog, Chase was quick to strafe to the side, his body wounds screaming from the explosive moment. Both dogs collided with one another, snapping their teeth and barking with the intention to maim. Being a German shepherd, Chase was stronger, although his severe burns had weakened him. Zuma was lighter and his species was not known for fighting, but he utilized every drip of his elusiveness and speed to evade Chase's snaps and swipes. As the sound of their snarls and battle cries bounced off the walls, Chase thrust his head forward in an attempt to grab the feral Labrador. Quickly jumping to the side, Zuma rolled off the ground as his friend passed over him. Now behind his foe, he jumped into the air and landed on Chase's back, instantly gripping his teeth into the shepherd's burned scruff and yanking it in all directions. Drops of blood and flesh slowly tore off one by one as Zuma mauled into him, Chase howling as he tried to shake him off. In a swift motion, Chase threw himself into the charred wall, crushing Zuma under it and causing a breath to escape the lab, forcing him to release his teeth. Quickly, Chase bucked his legs, tossing the lab off balance and making him lower his head as he tried to keep himself up. Now it was Zuma who screamed as Chase whipped his head around, catching his own teeth into Zuma's neck and ripping him down to the floor. The lab collided with the ground, snarling and raging as he raked his claws in all directions, leaving red gashes on his attacker's face. Ignoring the pain, Chase crushed his teeth in his brother's neck as deep as they would go, using his own claws brutally hack away at Zuma's belly. Each swipe of his arm tore into the lower dog, first swiping off brown clumps of fire, then his claws suddenly ran red as swipes of blood were ripped out. He released Zuma with a pained howl as his lab managed to knock him off, punching his paws across Chase's eyes. As the shepherd staggered away, Zuma struggled to stand up as agonizing groans of pain left his muzzle. His neck was matted and red, and large streams of blood were leaking from his belly. Fighting against his own injuries, Chase kept his breathing steady while locking eyes with his opponent. With brewing fire, they circled each other, Chase's ears suddenly picking up noise in the ceiling. Glancing upward, he could faintly hear something moving up above, likely in the vents. He knew the sound all too well, and his eyes widened at the realization that they weren't alone. Even in his darkest hour, Chase couldn't help but laugh, letting a slow chuckle slip out right at his brother's face. He laughed because Zuma failed, the basement and tower were destroyed, yet he and the creature who started it all still walked alive. With a look of fierce hatred, Zuma sucked in his breath as he sprinted forward again, baring his teeth as he lunged for any possible opening. He was met in the middle, Chase putting his paws forward and intercepting the Labrador, clashing them together and briefly locking their arms in a barking, snarling mess. The creature above them began to audibly move faster, responding to the noises of a broken family ripped apart by tragedy. A rush of adrenaline allowed Chase to violently shove Zuma off, flipping him to the side as he shifted his weight. The thinner dog hit the floor and instantly rolled back to his paws. Darting his amber eyes to the floor, he spotted a small blunt pipe likely broken off in the explosion. Wasting no time flipping it into the air and grabbing it in his teeth, he wielded it like a blunt weapon. Now Chase faltered in surprise as he took a step backward, taken off guard. Zuma had never used a weapon before, as noted by his sloppy form of swinging a hard right as he jumped at Chase. The shepherd winced and jumped aside as quickly as he could, dodging the swing although he stumbled on the floor. Surging with ferocity, Zuma instantly swung back in the opposite direction, his own body getting carried by the weight of the swing. There was no window to evade the attack, and Chase winced as he held up an arm in a feeble attempt to defend himself. The blunt metal slammed against his body, knocking him backward and making him yell as white-hot pain paralyzed his arm. Dazed and mouth-sore from holding the metal, Zuma shook his head as he dragged the pipe along the floor, watching his old leader stumble against the edge of the room. Even as his small body was beginning to buckle under the spent energy, the Labrador snarled as he held up the pipe in his mouth, bringing it in for another, albeit lackluster swing. Acting in a flash, Chase jumped forward and caught the pipe in his paws, intercepting the attack and locking the weapon between them. Zuma staggered as the shockwave hit him, nearly breaking a few of his teeth, then his head shot backward as the shepherd's paws punched his nose. The pipe dropped and hit the dusty floor, Chase leaping out and grabbing the lab's paw in his teeth before he could fall back. Pulling Zuma right back in, he braced his claws and tore into the lab's already wounded belly, tearing into it even more than before. His opponent tried to scream, but every sound was muffled by the shock as he was ripped into. By the time he pulled his paw free, Zuma was already a wounded mess. His stomach was shredded, raining blood in a way that flooded the floor, his paws and face torn into, sending powerful agony through him. Furiously growling, Chase stumbled back as his hold was broken, narrowing his eyes as he watched the labs move. With next to nothing left, Zuma grimaced his pain as he limped over, his hatred being the only thing to carry him if his body couldn't. But hatred had a way of taking more than it gave, and Zuma tried to attack although his form and speed were greatly hindered. Chase stopped it right as it happened, grabbing Zuma's managed paw in his teeth and yanking him forward. The Labrador let out a squeak as his body tumbled to the floor like broken glass. Breathing heavily as blood escaped him, Zuma slowly looked up, fighting his pain for anything left to fuel him. Taking a final stand, the lab staggered back up. Instantly, Chase's claws met Zuma's face, cleanly tearing into his eye and nose. The attack finished it, the force of the impact throwing Zuma back to the ground, and this time he didn't get up. Watching his brother fall, Chase breathed heavily as the fight ended, his blistered body reprimanding him for the abrasive movement. The Labrador was subdued, as the shepherd's attack was meant to incapacitate him, such is the strategy of going for the eyes. Even if the other was intended a fight to the death, Chase's heart only broke at the sudden sight of Zuma broken on the floor. The fight left him, his ears and tail lowered as his face wore the expression of utter sorrow. Struggling to stand, Zuma writhed on the floor, snarling and writhing as he was covered in cuts. Breathing sporadically, he looked up at his adversary, a hateful expression crossed his face, yet there was a faint glimmer of something else. So, he fought to get out, flexing his bloodied brown paws. Is this it? You're gonna kill me too? He let a red grin peel across his face, baring his broken teeth and cut gums. Do it then. If Chase had any sliver of urges to kill the Labrador, they were history by now. In the fight he acted in defense, swiftly bringing the lab down as his own drive carried him past his body's agony. But for every second he spent staring at his fallen brother, only sadness was met in return. He simply could not kill Zuma, never in 100 years could he bring himself to do the deed. After a long moment, Chase shook his head. No. I won't. What? Zuma said, almost in genuine surprise. You have to. You have to dash. A groan interrupted him, pain coursing through his frame. You need to finish what you started, right? The question hung in the air, but the shepherd merely looked away. The musty air of the burned room was filled with grief from both sides, a clashing of bloody teeth and claw ending with only sorrow and regret. Chase could see it now, the Paw Patrol was truly gone, no matter what he tried to tell himself. Something about the revelation brought an odd flicker of peace to his heart. I already have, Chase said, a tear running down his face. Goodbye, Zuma. He turned his back on the lab, returning to the vent gate on the wall. His brother's voice shouted in alarm. What? No. Get back here. Chase gripped his paws along the edge of the vent gate, beginning to tug it free. Chase. You won't leave me here. You're a killer just like the rest. The shepherd swiftly gave a final tug, successfully pulling it off the wall and providing access to the vents inside. Think of Ryder, damn it. Ryder. Chase merely chuckled as he dipped his head down and climbed into the vent, his paws crossing over from burned tile onto sheet metal. Chase. The call fell on deaf ears as the shepherd vanished into the narrow corridors, the tip of his tail finally disappearing away. Zuma watched it go, and with a horrible sinking feeling, he realized he was alone. Completely abandoned and left behind, a fate worse than death. Chase. He shouted as loud as he possibly could, but there was no response. His enemy had escaped, as well as all his friends and family. Everything had failed, a shot to his gut that bled his own perfectionism. Everything was written to plan, yet it was he who suffered alone and abandoned. Looking around helplessly, he couldn't believe his own situation. "No," he uttered simply. His breathing went shaky, and he reached a paw forward in an effort to crawl. It was then he remembered how injured he was, his managed body unable to move. Growling, Zuma refused to bleed out underground where no one would find him. He had to get back. Fighting his pain, he reached forward again, his eyes locked on the vent opening. A large, degloved hand suddenly dipped down in his view, flexing 5 razor-sharp claws. The wrist was fastened to the arm with shreds of burned vein and intestine, reeking a smell of burnt flesh. Zuma's breathing stopped, his heart skipping a beat as the sound of animalistic growling emitted behind him. With nowhere to go, the lab helplessly looked behind him, terrified of what he would see. Ferox Malus was beyond pissed off. Its wormy, organ-like body showed clear blistering and burns. It had likely found somewhere to hide in the explosion, although not without suffering a few of its own injuries. What locked Zuma's expression and nearly stopped his pulse was the creature's face. The skin mask it wore, the only thing giving Ferox Malus a resemblance to a dog, was completely gone. Likely it burned off, and instead of still wearing it, the creature simply discarded it away. Its true face underneath would haunt Zuma in the final seconds of his life. It had no ears or nose, such features only the mask possessed instead of Ferox Malus itself. Its entire head was composed of bloody pink flesh, with visible veins and moving worm-like appendages moving around it. With its mask gone, the large clumps of eyes that dotted its face were now revealed. In addition to its 2 main eyes, at least several more infested its head in various areas. Its chin, cheeks, and even the side of its muzzle had a bloodshot eye peeking out, all staring down at Zuma. Its mouth was locked in a permanent snarl, its full jaw now exposed as a line of jutting fangs. Tentacles hung down from the back of its head, moving in the air with the rest of them. Ferox Malus was never a dog to begin with, only a vile, crooked monster who sadistically wore the skin of one. Zuma took only one fearful step back. Ferox Malus seized him in an instant, attacking with all the rage and spite that could drip from such an awful creature. It latched its tentacle around the Labrador's legs and dragged him away, vanishing into the darkness of the basement. Straight face. Crawling through the vents of the lookout, Chase hurried as much as he could. He shuffled his body through the dark passageways with only his family in mind. He saw light up ahead briefly, bringing hope into the dog as he quickened his pace. Approaching an exit in the vent, Chase excitedly peeked out, only for his joy to dim as he realized it was just another room. Great. He grumbled, getting agitated with the complexity of the basement. Looking around, he saw only a massive furnace connected to several pipes along the walls. Some tables were stacked against the wall, and various objects littered the room. Chase rolled his eyes and turned away when he suddenly stopped cold, freezing to a halt as he suddenly remembered. The boiler room, he had found it. Amidst the terror and fear, Chase had almost entirely forgotten this room even existed, the core location he was trying to go to from the very beginning. In a foolish action, he had discarded his gun and ACG radio within these very walls, and now he could finally get them back. Exploding into movement, Chase turned and climbed out of the vent, finally returning to the boiler room as he stepped out. His heart pounded as he darted his gaze around, the triumph of finally reaching his objective almost sending him into a frenzy. Then he stopped, his gaze fell upon the one soul that remained trapped within, Sky. With a haunting breath, Chase couldn't move as he spotted her. At first, she looked alive, merely sleeping on the metal table, and for a moment he was tempted to call her name. The cockapoo lay motionless, rigor mortis already settling in to lock up her limbs as her eyes dulled. She was long dead, merely encased in a tomb that was the lookout. Averting his eyes, although he couldn't hide from the guilt and shame that now hung over him, he took to the ground and trailed his nose, searching for his lost belongings. He kept his mind forward, but the haunted memory of the murder in the lookout constantly crept up to him. He finally found his gun, bullets still within it, sitting on the floor under a table where it was tossed. Upon picking it up, Chase realized he had no way of efficiently holding it. His pup pack was long gone, yet he couldn't remember when he lost it. If it wasn't thrown off in the explosion, then it was lost sometime earlier in another attack. Lowering his ears in a whimper, he knew it'd be foolish to leave a weapon behind, especially now. With no other option, he made sure the safety was on and nestled the gun into his collar, the plastic strap still firmly holding on despite the burns around it. Ryder had made them well. The feeling of the metal on his neck was uncomfortable, not to mention the anxiety of having a weapon so close to him. He also found the blood reader sitting on the floor, the one device that was supposed to save them all, yet a single misuse doomed them. Chase felt shame looking at it and kicked it away into the ash where it would never be found again. The ACG radio was uncovered a few feet away, and to Chase's delight, it was still intact. Holding up the small device, he was suddenly filled with uncertainty. What if he did something wrong? What if they couldn't hear him? What if they weren't even in Adventure Bay anymore? Cyrus and the others long packed up their things and vanished. Even then, he was out of options. Chase hit the button on the center, and a blinking green light turned on, a signal that it was activated. Hello? He spoke into it, half expecting a reply. Can anyone hear me? The radio responded with only static, no sign of an answer from the other side. The shepherd let out a sigh, already expecting this chase of, well, what was once the Paw Patrol. Look, I don't know if anyone can hear me, but we found it. He reported, I mean hell, Ferox Malice really is here, it's been here for who knows how long. We fought it in the basements and we all got out except for one of us. We also picked up Liberty from the Archline Foundation. I don't know if that's important. He sighed into the device. This animal, this creature, it's nothing that belongs in this world. If you can hear me, send the artillery or whatever you have, it's mutated far out of control. He shrugged, all right, that's all. He let the radio fall out of his paw, plucking it to the floor. He turned back to Sky, still lying on the table. Shaking his head, he knew he'd face his crimes and death, although he had other matters to attend to now. He was tempted to place her in the furnace, gifting her a final rite of cremation. However, the explosion stole away all the fuel and ruptured the gas pipes, leaving the burning machine unusable. Turning around, he spotted the elevator doors that led to the rest of the tower. The power was beyond out, yet the damage the tower had received gave Chase an idea. The doors were cracked and slightly bent inward, allowing the shepherd to climb through them and emerge into the dark elevator corridor that led only upward. Surrounded by dead machinery, looking up he could see the elevator, still stuck on the main floor as it was pinned by debris and rubble, unable to move. Gripping the dangling cords and chains, Chase began a steady climb upward. He was thankful for that moment of Ryder teaching him how to climb during his police training. Emerging through a broken hole in the elevator, Chase climbed up into the main floor of the tower on ground level. Looking around, the tower was completely unrecognizable compared to what it used to be. He was technically outside, but the explosion had leveled the tower, causing the main observation deck to fall and crash to the ground. Even with the canopy of broken metal above him, the grass floor was unmistakable, and Chase greatly enjoyed finally placing his paw upon the cool ground outside after all that time underground. Light peeked through the slits and crevices of the metal, signaling that it was no longer dark outside, and sunrise was just beginning. He never felt happier crawling through the wreckage and poking his head out into the fresh air. He would never take anything for granted again. The sight of trees and fields had never been so beautiful. The kennels still stood in a circle around the fallen tower, although Zuma's had been smashed under debris. He was finally outside. He escaped. There were no words to describe how amazing the sun felt on his fur after hours of dark cold from the basement. No more machinery, no more disgusting gore, no more infection, just a warm orange sky and bright green grass to embrace him. Taking in a deep inhale of fresh, outside air, he felt his body pain ease from the rays of the warm sun. Although there was no time for sunbathing, he still had to reunite with the others and flee the hospital. Then a voice met his ears. "How am I supposed to know? I'm not going back down there." He turned his head in the direction of the sound and immediately started to walk. He was about to call out to the voice when he listened in more intently. "Yeah, I have the mix and the Dalmatian." Chase stopped, his eyes narrowing as he listened. Crouching down low, he began to creep forward with reduced noise. Darting back close to the massive pile of debris and metal that was once a tower, he used the jutting pieces as cover as he approached the speaker. Peeking out from his cover, he spotted Liberty standing in the clearing. "Can't you just come get me?" The dachshund argued into her collar. "I almost died several times." The sight of Liberty talking into a radio made Chase furious, as he firmly remembered she never had a collar during their time in the basement. She either hid it away where no one would see, or a possibility that made Chase's blood boil, she had taken it off Marshall or Rocky. Growling, he stepped out to confront her. She didn't see him. "No, I don't have the shepherd or the Labrador, and frankly, we may just have to cut our losses." She rolled her eyes. "Yeah, I know Dutch will be pissed, you don't have to tell me." Chase came up behind her. "Who are you talking to?" "Ah." The smaller dog spun around in surprise, startled as she spiked her singed fur. The sight of the burned shepherd nearly toppled her, and a very audible click could be heard from her radio. Whoever she was speaking to immediately hung up the line. "Chase, your dash," she stuttered in disbelief. "Who were you talking to?" How are you dash?" "Who were you talking to?" Chase said with a growl, taking a step closer to her. Hey. Liberty recoiled fearful, taking a defensive step back. "Back off." Chase wasn't having it. "Where are the others?" "I said back off." She snarled, baring her teeth. "I have a knife." A knife. She had been armed this whole time. Finished with her games, Chase quickly sat back and pulled the gun from his collar. Liberty's eyes went wide, all her defiance gone in a snap upon spotting the much more lethal weapon. Fear spread through her as she stared down the barrel of the gun. "Talk," he hissed, pointing the weapon between her eyes. His captive flicked her eyes to the side, looking for a way out, yet there was none. Realizing she was caught, Liberty was angry as she emitted a growl, only to sigh in defeat. Narrowing her eyes, she fluffed her fur a little in an attempt to maintain her composure. She met Chase's fiery gaze. "Fine." Lockdown, Paw Patrol. "Firstly, get the gun out of my face." Liberty tried to bargain, growling increasingly agitated the longer the weapon was pointed at her. Despite her qualms, Chase was in no mood. Say something I like, and maybe I will. He had no reason to trust her anymore, a betrayal that only added insult to injury as he was forced to deal with Zuma. He was exhausted, distressed, and trying with every fabric in his mind trying to ignore the blistering pain all over his body. Under such circumstances, Liberty was out of second chances. His captive glanced to the side, visible frustration peeling around her. It was obvious she was holding something back, the gears in her head turning for an explanation while the sun slowly rose in the distance. Looking up at him, her voice went cold. Ferox's malice never escaped, she confessed, it was released. What? Chase tilted his head, slightly lowering the gun. As you probably expect, Archline has rather unconventional ways of testing their experiments. Ferox's malice is some kind of bioweapon, I think. She shrugged. It started as a dog, just like you and me, but then it was just test after test, experiment after experiment, until it started wearing skin masks. You couldn't even tell it was meant to be a dog. I think they planned on selling the creature after it was perfected. Sell it? To who? Liberty chuckled. Who knows? Terrorists, corrupt governments, the army? She listed off anyone willing to pay top dollar for a creature with enough power to win a war. Her face darkened, fearing the potential for such a monstrous animal. Dutch, the leading scientist in charge, denied any isolated testing. He always said it wasn't genuine enough, that basic tests wouldn't do it. A low growl emitted from her as she spoke, so instead, he decided to unleash the monster into Adventure Bay and watch its statistics. Holy shit, Chase faltered at the revelation. Whoever this twisted dog was, he heartlessly gave the command to drop a lethal monster into an innocent city. All for the sole purpose of science, whoever had to die for it. The dachshund continued. They implanted some kind of device into its body, something to track it and keep its movements on record. But we underestimated how smart that thing really is. Within minutes it located the implant and tore it out. Her voice was filled with spite. When that happened, Dutch looked at me and asked me if I wanted to go on a scouting mission. You did say you worked for them, Chase put it together, but as what? If you're thinking of a scientist, then no, Liberty waved her paw, I was a intern of sorts. But wouldn't you have been in danger too by being here? Of course I am. After he threw me out, he instantly turned around and hired the ACG to quarantine the town so Ferox's malice could be contained. She scoffed, so he obviously knew it was dangerous, he just needed someone disposable to hopefully bring back a few samples. Keeping the gun steady, although lowering it away from his captive, Chase thought intently as confusion barreled through him. You mean to tell me, this is all some kind of test? His voice rose as he spoke. Those fuckers just dropped a vicious killer into Adventure Bay for the whole purpose of a test? Liberty was growing antsy the more unhinged Chase got, fearing his use of a weapon. Yes, I guess. Yeah. She stuttered apologetically, I'm sorry. And Cyrus and rest of the ACG, they knew about this? I don't think so. She looked aside. They do know Ferox's malice must be contained and not damaged. I think that's the only order they received. None of them know that it was willingly released. Disgusted and enraged, Chase bristled his fur as his paw fought to pull the trigger. Killing Liberty would be pointless, if not detrimental, yet his anger was surfacing to its boiling point. All he could muster out in his animosity was one simple question. So, where's Ryder in all this? Liberty went silent, an action that nearly shouted its own answer more than her words could communicate. It was obvious Chase was going to hate the answer, but he didn't know what to expect at this point. Nothing made sense to him anymore, and although he itched to save his family, another side of him was festering for answers. He said he was going into the mountains, he continued, voice low, but after everything, I don't know what to believe now. He lowered his torn ears in sorrow. everything is just. He shook his head, different, ruined. So where is he? It was a moment before his captive spoke, her eyes showing a faint flicker of sympathy. He was paid by Archlyn Dash. She couldn't even finish her sentence as Chase suddenly tackled her to the ground. No. He snarled, ferally barreling into her and pinning the smaller dog into the grass. Don't say that. Don't you dare say that. He barked, not noticing he dropped his gun. Don't you even begin to tell me that Ryder abandoned us. Chase Dash Liberty staggered under his grip. He's been with us for years. He rambled on, denial in his mind. He saved me, he saved all of us. He's guided us, loved us, He stopped, growing breathless. His voice cracked faintly. He wouldn't do that to us. Shaking his head, he fiercely rejected the idea of someone he looked up to turning his back on the dogs. Years of inspiration and awe were at risk of being shattered all in an instant. Was it not a dog's purpose to express its love and loyalty to its owner, especially that of a German Shepherd, the most hardworking and loyal breed of dog? Animals tended to be very forgiving, especially household pets, and what would result if their loyalty was exploited? He choked out, slowly loosening his grip on Liberty. No. Fearful of speaking, Liberty released a terrible truth. Chase, humans are very manipulative beings. Archlyn paid him a massive sum of money to leave. Fucking money? The shepherd said in disbelief. Ryder's not greedy, no one's that greedy. He barked in protest. You'd be surprised, Chase. Money can do a lot of things to people. She tried to explain. They gave him enough to make new towers, recruit more dogs, hell, start a whole new legion. I don't understand. Well, of course you don't, Liberty shrugged. You're not a human. Since the beginning, Chase always made the mistake of desiring answers to things he wouldn't or couldn't understand. He nearly pulled the trigger on himself by aligning with Cyrus, throwing him down a rabbit hole of terrible truths he wished he never knew. Yet if he had not exposed himself to the terror and destroyed his innocence, Ferox Malice likely would have done even more damage as it slipped under his radar. Even now, the puppy struggled against the one thing he fought every day to grip, yet always slipped from his mind, the complexity of humanity. The very thought of a loving owner dropping everything they loved for a couple of $1 million was bewildering to him. Money was nothing to a dog, therefore they had no understanding of it. Sighing, he released Liberty and stepped off. So, that's it then. He sighed, it's all over. Not exactly, the smaller dog stood up, there's still another way. Chase looked up at her. You need to come with me back to the Archlyn Foundation, she explained. I called them after we got out. They want you, they want all of you. What do they want with us? Chase narrowed his eyes. I told them about all the biomass Ferox Malice created in the basement. Turns out it's never done that before. She informed him, since you were all physically exposed to it, Dutch wants you all back for questions. You mean testing? So I locked Marshall in his kennel, she said with a wince, and I had to knock out Rocky maybe. What? Look, you can kill me later. Liberty waved off, but this is your way out of here. Archlyn is willing to house you all, to save you, to free you from all this hell. They're already pissed off that Zuma is gone, they don't want to lose you too. Chase was skeptical. Why? Because they care about our safety, or because they don't want to lose any more assets? He growled, why should I trust anything these people say if they're the ones who doomed the town to begin with? You have no other option. A silence followed as Chase ran out of words. He was dumbfounded, going through any other road in his head only to find that each one led to a dead end. Was Archlyn truly the only way out now? He just wanted his family to be safe, and if turning themselves over to the scientists was the only way out, then it would be the way to go. After a long moment of thought, the shepherd spoke with great reluctance. "I don't trust you," he said. "I will never trust you. I wouldn't walk to even a water dish with you." Leering up at her, a growl hissed through his teeth. "I hate you, and I want to hurt you. The sole reason I'm not is because I want to get out of here alive, and when we do, I don't want to see you, or hear from you ever again." Liberty visibly expressed relief. "Good enough, I promise everything will go smoothly from here on out." "So what happens now?" Liberty pointed to the few remaining kennels. "I have to, contain you," she gave an apologetic smile. "Contain me?" Chase flatly repeated her words with a blank expression. "Dutch's orders. Since you're compliant, thank God, I can put you in with Marshall. At least he'd see his family again." Chase merely shrugged and began walking over to the red, dormant fire engine. He wasn't happy about being caged like a feral animal, but up to this point he no longer had anything to say at all. He was done fighting, and ready to turn himself over to anything that could save them. Both dogs approached the closed kennel slowly, silently treading through the grass. The sun was lifting higher in the sky, yet the atmosphere was still painted in beautiful orange and yellow. It was almost like the sky was mocking them, painting a beautiful canvas over such a tragic scene. "How did you lock the kennel from the outside?" Chase pricked his ear, trying to listen for any sound of Marshall inside. To his interest, he couldn't hear even a sound. Liberty pointed her paw at a piece of shrapnel she jammed into the side of the door, jammed the mechanism. It was an interesting tactic that Chase felt genuine awe at seeing. For a split second, he wondered what would have happened if he had sealed the kennels during his attempted lockdown. It seemed like months ago the first body fell. Chase was weaker then, naive, and he would forever curse his younger self for making such an action. "All right, Marshall," Liberty pulled out the jammed metal. "I got you a friend." She wedged her nose under the door and began to lift it up. A smile peeled across Chase's face, eager to see his Dalmatian again. The door was lifted up, revealing a completely empty kennel. Liberty blinked, faltering in disbelief. Huh? Clear confusion spread across her, her eyes flicking at every corner of the den. Where is he?" Chase asked her in confusion. "You said he was here." The kennel was all too unchanged. A slightly messy dog bed, treat crumbs, a built-in desk with scattered fire equipment, the signature fireplace, and a faint aroma of chicken kibble decorated the interior. It was explicitly Marshall's kennel, yet the supposed Dalmatian was missing. Liberty stuttered, alarm flaring in her as she walked into it. "He was. I locked him in, he couldn't have escaped." "Are you sure?" He sniffed his nose, ignoring the delectable chicken scent for any sign of his brother. He definitely smelled a hint of him, but Marshall wasn't there. The city dog whipped her head toward him. "What, you think I'm crazy?" She lashed. "I led him in here, watched him walk in, then I shut the door." Walking into the kennel, Chase sniffed the ground trying to hone his old detective skills. How would Marshall escape if the door had been sealed? "Every kennel is a one-way in, one-way out, right?" Liberty frantically asked him, questioning her own sanity. Looking forward, Chase's eyes rested on the small structure that resided on the far wall of the den. The one piece of the kennel that Marshall was so proud of having. The fireplace, the opening in the wall surrounded by paved concrete to protect the rest of the den. Housing two little logs and a blanket of soot, the interior contained a hole in the top that connected to a chimney. "Not this one," Chase slowly grinned. "That clever dog." Sniffing the fireplace, and slightly sneezing as soot went up his nose, he noted paw prints left in the black sand. "A fucking fireplace?" The city dog quipped behind him. Thanks to Rocky's help, Marshall built this into his kennel. The shepherd was beaming with pride, a wide smile wordlessly conveying his silent triumph over his brother's ingenuity. "We called him crazy for it." Straightface. HNNG, come on. Marshall grunted as he struggled to drag Rocky's body across the dirted floor. Holding the mix by his scruff, he vigorously pulled with all the strength in his teeth and neck he could muster. Rocky was certainly heavier than he looked. The Dalmatian ached all over, his white body now blackened with soot and tiny pieces of debris. The wet grass outside cleaned the undersides of his paws as he snuck away, but still he remained filthy. He watched Liberty attack Rocky from behind. The mix was blinded by his own trust for the city dachshund, a dog who never fit in since they first met. After his brother was knocked to the ground, Marshall was helpless as Liberty pulled a knife on him, ordering him to get in his kennel. With regard to his own life, he obeyed and was escorted into his home. He heard the door get pulled down behind him, followed by the sound of bending metal as something was jammed in to seal it. After pacing around his kennel a few times, a fit of anger rose within him like a burning fire. For far too long had he been pushed around and led on leashes. It was time to act. Narrowing his eyes as a fierce determination churned in him, he wriggled himself into his unlit fireplace and climbed up the chimney. Sneaking behind the kennels to deter Liberty's line of sight, he returned to where Rocky's body lay in the grass and grabbed him. Realizing quickly how heavy he was, he knew there was no time to drag him across the clearing and into the forest. For cover's sake, he had to return into the lookout, or what was left of it. Pulling Rocky through the shattered glass doors, they crouched low in what used to be the interior of the elevator. After the main upper floor crashed down, the area around them was shrouded in complete wreckage, efficiently hiding them. Come on. He pulled Rocky to a dark corner and tried to shake him awake. Wake up, don't tell me this is what does you in after all we've been through. He slapped his paw across the mix's face, trying whatever he could to open his eyes. The impact jerked the gray dog's face to the left, and Marshall's pads stung from the force. Don't make me deal with Liberty by myself, please, he tried to growl, attempting to hide his growing sorrow behind playfulness. Wake up. He slapped him again. To his relief, Rocky began to stir. He shifted on the ground. Ow, dude, my head, he groaned in mild pain, reaching a paw up to his face. What the hell? Hey, you're not allowed to die yet. Marshall laughed his tears away. Now get up. Reaching out a paw to be helped up, Rocky winced. What happened? Liberty happened. She backstabbed us, just like Zuma. The firefighter spat, helping his brother back to his paws, and without Chase, it's just me and you now. He's really gone, isn't he? The mix lowered his ears. I can kinda still smell him around though. Yeah, so do I don't think it'll ever leave my nose. Rocky looked to the ground, trying to make sense of Chase's final order. I guess I'm the leader now. Leader of what, me? Marshall tilted his head. There's no one else left. Well, I'd rather have you instead of no one at all, smiled the mix, happy that there was even one piece remaining of the Paw Patrol. If we take Liberty together, we can overpower her and maybe get some answers. Looking back toward the wreckage around them, both dogs took a moment to take in the ruin that was their home. Rocky knew they had to leave when everything was finished, but where they'd go was unheard of in his mind. Surely they weren't going back to the streets. He had vowed to himself and every dog he loved he'd never seen them in those alleyways. A great sadness befell them both, and they took a moment to sit down on all fours, mourning the end of their organization. A gentle voice floated up. Guys? Both dogs sprang up in alarm, darting their widened eyes toward the source of the voice. It had seemingly come from below, a few feet away where a large pile of wreckage stood. Underneath it, the floor had caved in, exposing the basement. The voice was recognized immediately by Marshall. That was Zuma. His heartbeat quickened as he looked around, starting to walk over. Rocky was unsure, but he couldn't find the words to explain why. Zuma? Marshall called, barking loudly into the stuffy air, "Are you alive?" After a few seconds, Zuma's voice piped up from below the debris, "I am." "Thank goodness, I thought you both were dead." The voice was muffled and weak, as it struggled to get its words through the solid wreckage between them. "Where are you?" The Dalmatian picked up his pace. The Labrador's betrayal was still fresh in his mind, but Marshall's sole weakness was his own heart. Rocky narrowed his eyes. "Marshall." "Under here." The voice gently nudged the debris plugging the newly formed entrance to the basement. "I just need an opening and I can climb out." Quickly scoping out the pile of metal and twisted steel, Marshall spotted a sheet of metal that was plugged into the side. Desperate to save his brother, he gripped the twisted piece of debris and started trying to yank it out. A shiver went up Rocky's spine. "Marshall, wait dash. Rocky, help me out here." The firefighter ignored the protests of the other dog, snarling as he attacked the metal. Slowly, it began to come loose, and dread surged in Rocky, only multiplying with each tug the Dalmatian gave. Managing to bend it outward just a little, a tiny opening was created in the wreckage, and Marshall reached his paw in. "Here, grab my paw, I can pull you out." Alarm flared in the gray mix, springing him into action. "Marshall, no." He ran forward and tackled the Dalmatian away, forcefully pulling his arm out. They both crashed a few feet away to the ground. "Ow. What are you dash?" The firefighter bristled as he kicked up dust. "What are you doing?" "I felt him. I felt his paw." Hyperventilating, fear plugged Rocky's voice, and he looked back with a silent prayer that it wasn't too late. His fur stood up on one end, breathing heavily as he kept Marshall pinned. The Dalmatian fought at first, snarling to claw away Rocky's leg, only for the stench of burned flesh and gore to emit from the new opening he created. His anger died out, and fear locked up his throat. "We're supposed to help each other," the voice said again, still Zuma, "so why?" A massive bang of impact shook the wreckage, as something below smacked against it. "Are you?" Another bang shot through the air as flesh collided with metal. Rocky and Marshall stood up, traveling backward as terror climbed up their bones. The voice angered, shifting its pitch and tone until it wasn't Zuma's at all, but Rubble's, defying the inevitable. The creature below screeched in rage, driving its tentacles into the fine cracks and wriggling them between the pieces of metal. The dogs watched in horror as numerous worm-like appendages birthed from the crevices of the metal and glass, wrapped around them and tearing away each chunk. The monster trapped within was not keen on containment and was slowly forcing its way back into the daylight. With nowhere to go or hide, both dogs turned and ran. Straight face. Liberty and Chase were arguing when they heard the commotion. The shepherd was fed up beyond his limits of her failed games and ploys, and was about ready to shoot her leg out. Sensing the hostility, Liberty was growing more defensive, even believing she'd have to resort to violence after all. Just before they came to teeth and claws, the sound of panicked yelling made both dogs turn their heads. "Run!" Rocky called as he sprinted out into the grass. "It's calm." "Chase?" He skidded to a halt upon seeing his former leader. "Fuck, you're awake." Liberty snarled at the realization that she didn't hit him hard enough. Marshall came to the front. "Chase, you're alive." Ignoring Liberty's presence, the Dalmatian happily ran forward and threw himself into Chase, wrapping his arms tightly around him in an embrace. An audible squeak was heard from the shepherd as he was squeezed tightly, forcing the air out of his body for a nanosecond. Rocky was overjoyed to see his leader alive, but his attention was turned on the traitor. Liberty needed to be dealt with. "You!" he snarled, baring his teeth as he stalked over to her. The dachshund sensed it immediately. "Hey! Back off, I have a knife." "Fuck your knife." The mix waved off. "I'm gonna tear you apart." "Rocky, hold on." Chase tried to pry Marshall off. "Just give her a dash." All four dogs were cut off by a piercing scream slicing through the air, making them stop and face the source of the sound. Chase and Rocky turned with firm expressions, narrowed eyes, and flattened ears. Marshall took a step back, but anxiously swallowed and made his own stand. He was afraid, but this was no time to run away and flee. Overcome in horror, Liberty was already backing away, terror crawling across her face. To say Ferox Malice emerged from the wreckage was an understatement. It exploded out of the top, smashing through the roof of the tower and sending smashed pieces of metal raining down. Bristling its festering body, dripping and oozing with blood and bodily fluids, snapping and cracking its spindly limbs, it emerged out like an angry god, staring down at its prey with its unmasked teeth-lined head. Holy shit! Rocky stepped back. Screeching above them, Ferox Malice crouched down and planted its claws onto the roof, tearing up large pieces of metal like paper. Its tail traveled under the roof it stood on, fingering out pieces of debris like candy. Roaring its signature screech, it lifted up pieces of metal and meshed them into one massive ball of scrap. "Look out!" Chase snapped as he watched the creature lifted above its head. They scattered as Ferox Malice flung the projectile into them. It smashed into the ground, breaking apart in a blast of shrapnel. Rocky ducked his head at the sound, sprinting for his life for a kennel. It wasn't good protection, but it was something with a roof over its head. Liberty and Marshall dove under pieces of the fallen tower, sprawled out across the clearing. There they hid, fearful as they quivered before the terror of an unstoppable monster. Diving into a roll, Chase dodged the attack with a growl, briefly shaking his head of the dizziness. Enraged, Ferox Malice crouched and moved its hunches, and Chase realized quickly it was about to spring. Its tail danced in the air along with the rest of its tentacles, itching to be bloodied. Pushing against its powerful legs, the monster leapt into the air like a rabbit, its claws outstretched as a screech emitted from its teeth. Chase had nowhere to run as Ferox Malice landed directly in front of him, the shockwave of the landing knocking him over as grass and dirt pelted him. Coughing out blades of grass, the shepherd fearfully tried to stagger up, his voice cracking. The creature stood tall, rearing to its full height on two legs. It was utterly massive in size when standing up, even possibly towering over a grown adult. Growling as foul liquid secreted from its body, it stared down at the puppy as it flexed its claws. Chase's eyes fell onto Ferox Malice's left shoulder, and he spotted something he wished he hadn't. Embedded into the creature's shoulder was the bloodied, mangled corpse of Zuma, his fallen brother ripped in half and now worn like a trophy in its body. Zuma! The shepherd breathed in horror. Thousands of the living within me, Zuma's voice emitted from Ferox Malice's chest, devoured and assimilated for my form. Ferox Malice snarled its teeth, almost vibrating. Zuma is not dead, Chase. The voice laughed, puppeteering the Labrador. He is alive, right here. The creature lifted its arm, pointing a claw at Zuma's strung corpse. While he is connected with me, his mind is kept alive, as is Rubble's as well. I keep them because I need their voices, their memories, and their strength. Together we are one, our minds intertwined. Does it bring you solace to know that they are not truly dead? Ferox Malice emitted a noise, almost like a laugh, and you should be happy, because soon you will see them again, within me. Aghast with terror, Chase couldn't find the words to speak as he looked up at the terrifying creature. His body flattened as his heartbeat accelerated, his breaths picking up at a speed he couldn't keep track of. And I know, the creature suddenly swapped to the voice of Rubble, that there is nothing you want more than to see your loved ones again. It reached out, outstretching its arm with open claws, so let me grant you that wish. This was it, Chase was going to die. For a moment he wanted to run, as his paws shook for explosive movement, but a lingering static filled his head. In what he thought were his final seconds, all Chase saw were the claws of the creature, reaching out to snatch him up. The shepherd shut his eyes. Gunshot. A high-caliber gunshot was fired into the air, followed by several more. The crack of the rifle pierced into the ears of the dogs, making them dive with paws over their heads. Chase instantly dove to the ground as he heard it, a strike of panic stabbing him as he for a moment feared he had accidentally killed someone else. An enraged screech sounded from Ferox Malice as bullets tore into its chest, blasting out bits of gore and blood. The creature stumbled back as its organs screamed against its new wounds, hunching its body over as it took to all fours. Its tail whipped Chase across the forehead as it scampered into a retreat, fleeing for the cover of the lookout wreckage. Wincing from the sting, Chase was further knocked to the grass. Marshall peeked out from behind the jagged metal, trying to get a look at the smoking gun, A relieved smile suddenly peeled across him, and he never felt so happy to see the ACG. Go, go! Cyrus barked, running in with his rifle, don't let it get away. In seconds, dozens of armored dogs sprinted out of the forest, brandishing rifles as they charged in. While Marshall was elated at their saviors, Rocky took a step back in fear. Oh no! The trauma of the agony he had endured days ago from the military squad was still fresh in his mind. Rocky, wait, the Dalmatian beside him turned, trying to console him, they're here to help. But his words fell on deaf gray ears, as Rocky suddenly grabbed him and began pulling him away. Come on. We're getting out. Run. The mix rapid-fired his words as he tried to drag his brother. While the two dogs tussled to keep one another stable, Liberty spotted the ACG, and a growl of annoyance left her breath. They weren't supposed to be here, as Archline needed more time to pick them up. Agitated at the intervention, the dachshund backed up into the shadows, seeking to stay out of their sight. Chase, you're alive. Cyrus ran up to the puppy, a dog he had written off for dead so long ago. Holy shit, you're actually alive. I owe you an apology. The shepherd fearfully opened his eyes, looking up. Cyrus. His eyes widened. You heard my message. Of course we did. The Malinois nodded frantically, and we're here. Geez, you look terrible, he winced audibly, seeing the puppy's burned condition. Go with Bella, we'll take this thing down and wrangle up the survivors. Bella? Chase asked, but the Malinois leader ran off in pursuit of the creature before he could answer the question. His ears were filled with explosive sounds as dog after dog sprinted into view, surrounding the lookout ruins with guns loaded. Every single one was armored and brandishing weapons, ready to take down the threat once and for all. Slowly standing up, Chase heard his name get called. Turning around, he spotted a white Labrador retriever walking toward him. Chase. She called, come on, I'm here to get you to safety. He blinked, his mind tampered from all the sudden confusion. It's me, Bella. She said firmly, remember? We met at that coffee shop a few days ago, and I told you to stay out of our business? The white lab chuckled, I guess you didn't, heh? You. Chase's eyes widened, I remember you. Glad to hear it, Bella smiled, now come on. As Bella tried to lead the puppy away, Chase couldn't help but look back at the tower wreckage. Rocky and Marshall were still there, the exact location Ferox Malice had just fled in. My family, they're still in there. We know. We'll do whatever we can to get them out. And Chase stuttered when his eyes suddenly fell on someone else, Liberty. Even among the now 100 dogs swarming the clearing, he could easily spot the dachshund peeking out from behind her cover. Narrowing his eyes, he witnessed the smaller dog suddenly tear away, fleeing the scene. Alarm pricked in him, knowing Liberty was a part of the enemy faction, she simply couldn't get away. Wait. The shepherd jumped away from the soldier, after her. Bella had little time to react. She was too late. Chase had already exploded into a run, sprinting away from her and charging toward the forest after Liberty. A call of his name was barked into the air, but it was unclear if Chase didn't hear or ignored it entirely. After all of his mistakes, he had to rectify something, fix even one thing to repay what he had ruined. It started with catching Liberty and bringing her to justice, dragging her before Cyrus to shed light on Archline's crimes. His own rage and drive chugging him along, Chase disappeared into the forest. "No!" Rocky shouted as he backed up, Marshall firmly pinned behind him. "You won't take me." The two ACG soldiers before him held up their paws, although keeping their guns steady. "Kid, come on." One spoke through the fabric mask, his black ears flattening. "You need to cooperate with us." A full squad charged into the wreckage, fully ready to lay down their lives in pursuit of Ferox Malus. There they found the other remaining members of the Paw Patrol, arguing with one another about who to trust. Marshall attempted to speak words of reason to the mix, as his body was painfully pressed against the debris behind him, but Rocky ignored it. The floor underneath the mix was unstable, showing clear damage from the explosion. Any more stress and it would crash into the basement, dooming Rocky to a dark fate and rendering him a sitting duck for Ferox Malus. "I remember what you did to me." The mix bared his teeth. "You hurt me, you hurt all of us." The soldier turned his gun around his back, trying to hold out his gloved paw. "You're not safe. Ferox Malus just ran and hid into here, you need dash. Get away." The ACG soldiers really just wanted to grab Rocky in their paws and carry him out, but the clear damage to the floor cancelled out their options. Any more weight would fracture it. Rocky would have to walk to them willingly. Piercing screeches tore into their ears as Ferox Malus blasted out into view, rupturing the canopy of the tower's roof and sending metal shrapnel in all directions. 3 other ACG soldiers immediately turned and opened fire on the creature, the deafening pops of their rifles splitting through the air. The sounds of gunfire, roars of the creature, and bullets striking off metal surfaces only struck Rocky's mind even more. Ferox Malus snarled in rage, spitting its tentacle out of its mouth and impaling one of the soldiers, prompting an agonized scream as blood streaked from the shattered armor. It pulled the soldier into its jaws, clamping its teeth in and flinging it around like dead prey, snapping his bones beyond repair. The dog's corpse was tossed aside Ferox Malus' tail and snared around another soldier's leg, whipping him into the air and slamming him off the wall. A blood splatter formed on the surface as the soldier collapsed below, unmoving. The splashes of blood and screaming set alarm for the other soldiers. "Look, kid, there's no time," he pleaded to Rocky. The second soldier was forced to turn away, drawing his weapon and firing at the creature. Ferox Malus seemed to shrug off the bullets that hit it, raking its claws through another soldier and rendering him to bloodied shreds. More stabbed and shredded whatever dog dared to attack it. Body gore and broken armor flung in all directions, but still the ACG was relentless. "Flamethrowers!" Cyrus shouted into his radio, while Marshall ran beside him and cowered under. A soldier at his side turned to face him. "Captain, we were ordered to contain, not destroy. They said dash." "I know what they said." The Malinois snapped at his comrade, "But we can't let this thing continue on, too many have died." Now rebelling against the starting order, he bristled as he shouted into the radio, "Flamethrowers. All of them." A military helicopter soared down from the sky, the screeches of Ferox Malus clearly audible as the soldiers fought to keep it at bay. Hovering a couple of feet above the ground, its side doors opened, and several Great Danes in heavy armor all jumped out, landing into the blood-stained grass. They carried gas canisters strapped to their backs, fire-resistant armor, and masks shrouding their bodies. They were truly terrifying soldiers, driven home by the flamethrowers they carried at their sides. "Look, kid, you're going to die if you don't move," the soldier barked, flattening his ears. Rocky remained defiant. "I'll never trust you. You hurt me, you beat me. The second trooper turned around. That wasn't us. We can dash. He was cut off as Ferox Malus' claws snatched him from where he stood, snapping him in its grip and tossing him away. The remaining soldier flinched in terror, and he turned back to Rocky. Who was it? He asked frantically. The ones who hurt you. Come with me, and I promise you will find them out. The soldier pleaded, seeing the floor under Rocky beginning to crack. We never wanted to hurt you, we were just afraid. We were all afraid, knowing what that thing was capable of. He said desperately, once again reaching out his paw. Please, come with me. Seeing the soldier reach out to him, Rocky continued quivering as his words churned within him. The pup was terrified, his own PTSD flashing before his face. It was the ACG who scared and beat him, and now here they were trying to snatch him up. As fear clouded him, he thought it over as his paws scratched against an unstable concrete floor. Could he see justice for those who hurt him? Was it even possible? He had little to nothing to go off of. You promise? He asked shakily. The soldier hastily turned his head to the side, flinching as he grew more uncomfortable being in close proximity to the creature. Yes, absolutely, he turned back to the puppy, holding out his paw farther. Even through the military goggles and mask, he looked his brown eyes into the mix, trying with every fiber in his being to be sincere. An explosion of metal sent debris flying over their heads, complete with a group of ACG soldiers all screaming in terror. There was little time, and Rocky gulped as his heart quickened. Fearfully, he began to extend his gray arm outward, and the soldier held his own paw out farther in response. Tossing a soldier aside, Ferox Malus roared as it pinned another down and snapped its teeth into the dog's body, tearing it in half. Blood dripping from its maw, it eerily looked up, spotting Rocky and the soldier. Rage dripping at its claws, it hissed a tentacle over its face and flexed its claws. Taking the final step, Rocky braced himself as he held his paw out, and the soldier finally managed to grab him. In a swift pull, Rocky was yanked off the floor and swept onto the dog's back. The soldier wasted no time turning around and beginning a spring for the outside, only to realize Ferox Malus was charging straight for them. Snarling in seething fury, the creature reached for the dogs with outstretched claws. A massive cloud of fire blasted into the ruins, the dogs armed with flamethrowers marching in as they pulled the triggers on their horrific weapons. Each nozzle spewed an unforgiving flame into the area that burned and seared anything it touched. Ferox Malus was almost entirely consumed by it, prompting it to spring backward in fear. Rocky was swiftly carried away to safety. Its tail and back leg now caught fire. Ferox Malus screeched in rage as pain circulated through it. The flamethrower dogs only took this as a sign of progress and aimed their weapons a second time. Defiant, the creature refused to die and instead fled. It braced its stringy arms over its face and smashed through the wall, rupturing out the side of the lookout wreckage. Ferox Malus emerged into the outside clearing, prompting a hostile response from the ACG soldiers. Hissing in annoyance as bullets cut through its flesh, it split its jaws open to roar a warning at the helicopter, further agitated as the vehicle's searchlight beamed onto the creature. The lookout, suffering a final burst of damage, finally collapsed into dust and ruin. It was no longer possible to re-enter the wreckage, as now it was nothing more than a pile of broken metal and shattered memories. Trying to shake off the flames on its backside, Ferox Malus went to all fours and sprinted off toward the forest, its tentacles swiftly twirling in the air as it ran. As it pushed through the shrubbery, its flaming tail slapped against a tree, suddenly sparking a flame on its branches. Cyrus reared in horror as he witnessed the tree begin to light up in flames, the fire already spreading along the forest. Dear God! Cyrus breathed, then shook himself of his fears. All units, don't let it get away. He picked up his own weapon and charged after it, dozens of remaining ACG soldiers, including Bella, running at his side. Few soldiers stayed behind to tend to Rocky and Marshall. With visible proof the creature was no longer in the direct clearing, they were confident enough to land the helicopter and set up a medical station within it. Even as both puppies were carried in, they couldn't help but fearfully glance at the forest, now slowly erupting into a fiery inferno. Chase was in there, Liberty as well, Ferox Malice shortly after, and now Cyrus with his legion charging into the flames after them. Whatever would soon happen in the burning forest would mean the fate of Adventure Bay.
Hallo Leute, ich bin schon wieder da. Wieso spiele ich gerade, lasse ich die Musik ablaufen? Weil wir sind, ich bin noch am denken, soll ich weitermachen, aber ich bin am denken, was passiert, wenn es dann abstürzt? Und deswegen ist, wir werden eine Pause machen und dann, wenn wir noch die letzten 2 Chapters anhören, wenn ich dann wieder zurück für den nächsten Stream da bin. Wir machen mal etwa 1 Stunde 30 Minuten, 1 Stunde und 30-minütige Pause. Und bis dann Leute, ich bin gleich dann bald mit euch die letzten 2 Chapters anzuhören. Ja, bis später!